Hello everyone. So let's talk about the taxes and fees that we might levy on seasteads. Now, of course, we are talking about the large corporation-run seasteads because I think they are the most uh, practical option, and so they are essentially governments at this point of time. So, what's the difference? Shouldn't we just talk about some kind of a tax reform, or just generally what is a good form of taxation or alternative forms of taxation? Well, there are a few differences. I can think of two good ones. One of them is, of course, that we can cater to a very specific niche of people. For instance, if our seastead is just rich people or just poor people, we can specifically kind of tailor that to that group of people, and we might have to work with a much less diverse set of people. So, as compared to a country, for instance, a full-fledged proper country. So, for example, we might levy a membership fee, so which might be crazy for a country, right? You cannot have a membership fee because some people might be too poor to afford it, but we can do that for a seastead. And another point is, of course, the assertiveness, right? So we could be much more assertive because it's a private city, and so we can say, hey, this is our system. And again, the same thing with, say, membership fees, etc. We might not really care who thinks about it, what, or if it's whatever. We can just say, hey, it's our property and we can do whatever we like. Right, and that really helps us make points for the first uh, uh, kind of system that I want to talk about. That's the one with the fixed fees. So essentially, these are kind of more of a business way of doing things. So instead of having these complicated taxes, we can just have a simple fee that you are billed at. You just get a bill. I'm not talking about the return-free taxing um, systems. I'm just talking about just taking fees for certain services. So you would not have any tax as such, but certain services in this seastead would be monopolized by the government, essentially the central seastead corporation. Uh, Corporation. So what do we need here? So we need these services to be essential or mandatory. So either they're essential, like water, everybody needs to use water, or they need to be mandatory, as in you need to mandate by law or by your contract, essentially, that you have to have those services. You have to apply for those services. So, for example, fire safety, you can mandate that everybody has to have this insurance or have this service a registration with your local fire brigade, your local fire department, and you can collect fees for that according to your building. Car licensure. This is also one of the other mandatory requirements. You can enforce this by your contract that every car must have a license, and you can collect fees from there. Courtroom fees, or arbitration, whatever words you want to use, the government words or the private industry words. But you can have courtroom fees. A note up here, it's not the best idea to tax courtroom fees, because you don't really want to discourage people from suing, because that's your job, to have a lawful region in the middle of the ocean. So you don't really want to discourage people from suing. So courtroom fees might not be the best idea, but yeah, but good option. We still have courtroom fees in traditional countries, so it's not that bad, I guess. You can have electricity, water. Again, you can monopolize those industries. Uh, Public transit, contract fees. So instead of saying that we are taking arbitration fees after the fact, after the conflict has happened, we can just say something like a stamp duty, essentially, that we would just take a fee up front that we would then be obligated to handle any kind of conflicts that happen after that without any fees or with lower fees, and we can basically monopolize any industry we want. Why does it have to be a monopoly? Because of course, if it's not a monopoly, then these services, which are essentially subsidizing the rest of the programs of the government would be uncompetitive, and nobody will choose those services. So of course they need to be monopolized. Now, two specific very interesting examples of this uh, these services or these products is land and stuff on ship that will, and membership or residence fees. We'll talk about it later at the end of the video, because I guess they are different enough that they deserve their own category. Well, one more interesting point that I just note here, we can have these regulations. So again, this is seasteading is kind of a libertarian idea, so we might not really like regulations. Not might not, we don't like regulations. But of course, we can regulate and we can collect fees for those regulations. So you can think of, let's say Subway, for instance. It is a franchise, so you can just compel all your restaurants to have this kind of a franchise agreement, and then you can, according to the agreement, you would pay the fees or whatever charges are levied on them. So you can have those regulation systems. So that is much more flexible. What are the advantages of this kind of system where we have fixed prices and billing of specific services? Well, they are billable. That's the benefit. You can easily bill them. You don't need to calculate your income. You don't need to calculate consumption, anything. It's just simple. If you need the service, you pay a fixed price. And it's also a very business way of doing it. And I guess we are all, we libertarians especially, like it. So it's a very nice, straightforward method with very little overhead costs. So you don't need accountants or anything like that. It's simple. What are the disadvantages? Well, the disadvantages are, of course, that there is economic disruption. So if we, for example, if we tax water, then people will use less water, and that was one of the facts that was one of the requirements, that the services should be essential and or mandatory. So that was to prevent economic disruption. But of course, we might see little economic disruption depending on which one of these do you use. And of course, there is the equity and diversity problem, especially with membership fees and things like that. So even a poor person might have to pay the same as a rich person in case of a membership fee. Yeah, everybody pays the exact same amount, which might not be good for a diverse population. We'll talk about it later. So I forgot to add one more thing. Some of these fees are more conspicuous than others. So for instance, if you are paying service fees for specific services like water or electricity, then that's kind of hidden. And so people who are trying to invest in your seastead might not have the best idea on how much would it cost them, because they are paying these fees through indirect ways, which makes things more complicated that way. So even it's easy to collect, but it might be difficult for people to analyze sometimes. Another is just a more traditional form of taxation, just emulate what governments do. Of course, I guess flat tax will be much more appropriate, but this is just copying what governments do. And I guess not the smartest idea. If you don't like the government, that's why you're building seasteads, so maybe try something new. But just a flat consumption tax or a flat income tax. Of course, the problem with any kind of income tax is just it's too complicated. You need an entire system to just determine what is your income, right? And it's just too complicated. With flat consumption tax, it actually becomes very interesting, because you can just mandate a flat invoicing system, the system that they have on retail counters. You can have a centralized system of that. And so could become very easy to calculate that. You can have a centralized server that records every single transaction. You might not like it, but that's an efficient way to do it. And of course, fines. So you can collect fines. This is not exactly the best way to do it because you don't want to collect more fines just because you want more funding. Uh, funding That's not really the smartest idea, but yes, of course they can help, and they would help in any case. Of course, the disadvantage is it is complicated, but of course you can accommodate a very diverse population. So it doesn't matter if you have a flat consumption tax. Even if you're poor, you will pay less. If you're rich, you'll pay more. It's not progressive tax. So it's not proportional to the income, but it's certainly more equitable than a fixed membership fee or any kind of fixed fees. And of course, there is less economic disruption, or you can very precisely control the economic disruption that you want. Uh, so then we come to the most interesting parts, which is land and membership. Of course, there is no land in Seasteads, but you know what I mean, the platforms. So of course, you would probably monopolize the industry of having the land or creating this land. So you just tax that land, and you never sell that piece of platform or land, and you just rent it out and you collect the rent. This is actually very interesting, because especially if you are geocentric libertarian ideology, you already believe in these things even for traditional countries. So and there are a lot of economists, including Milton Friedman, for instance, who really liked the idea of taxing land. I was kind of against taxing land initially, but now kind of if you think about it, that's quite interesting, because then you just become a real estate holder, and everything that the seastead is doing is just to appreciate the price of that land, right? So that kind of again makes it a lot more like a business, and again it's simple. It's a rent, you just pay it, it's billable, no complicated calculations required, auction it out. So simple system. Again, there is not much of an equity problem up here, because if you own land, you're probably rich, or lease land, or you can do something like China where you lease it for 99 years practically, selling it. So of course the land is an interesting concept to give to receive money as land rents. So I want to plug in something here. I forgot to add the stuff on ship. To this. So essentially, the stuff on ship concept is that if you're having the ship, there's a limited amount of weight that you can put on the ship, probably, right? So what you do, you tax per kilogram of whatever stuff you want to bring on the ship, because there's a limited amount of weight that the ship can handle. So it could be a method of doing that, of limiting the amount of stuff on the ship. But at the same time, you would tax, and you would be able to gain fees from that. Again, a very simple fee, just based on the weight of the goods that you're bringing in. Do you give back the money when people take things out? I don't know. Probably you do. But that's an interesting concept. You pay for having things on a ship, which again costs money to the seastead, because you need more ballast tanks, or you need a better platform to handle more weight. So it does cost something. So it's a good place to start taxing. Membership is, of course, I guess the simplest and I guess the most straightforward one. If you want to be on land and on the seastead, then you pay a fixed fee per person to be there. Again, the least equitable system, but again, you can be assertive, right? You can just say, so what? And that's an interesting system. I guess it has very, very little I would say this is very little economic disruptions. It's very simple system, and you can say that's what Seastead is doing. It's really providing a good place for you to be in. So it's actually the right way to tax. It also really signifies the concept of voting with your feet, because if people go, then for each person going away you are losing a specific amount of money. So this voting with your feet works much more democratically in this kind of a system, uh, which might or might not be the best way to do it based on what your thoughts are and what's your ideology behind all this. But yeah, I like the concept. So thank you very much. And well, I will be probably posting, this is my first video, but I will probably posting a lot more, hopefully. I kind of get bored on these things. So, but yeah, just comment and like, and please subscribe.